This is Brent Allan Winters, CommonLawyer.com. This is part 14 of a series exploring whether or not our Declaration of 76 has much in it to commend itself to present application, or is it just an ancient document, a couple hundred years old, written by men long since forgotten and buried. Now, some people read history and consider history merely for the sake of history. They would say maybe for its cultural worth, for culture's sake, culture for culture's sake, history for culture's sake. But by so doing, history becomes no more than nostalgia. But history, for example, the history that can be found and known in our Declaration of 76, when used aright, delivers from danger and offers wisdom for living now. Never forget that the book of Exodus opens in the first chapter with this statement. It's not right at the very beginning, but it's right there at the beginning of the process of explaining the history. It says, and I think I'm quoting this correctly, "There arose in Egypt a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph." That is, he did not know who he was, or from whence his people came, or where God intended to take them. And because of that ignorance of history, that particular Pharaoh lost everything. To cultivate an understanding of the past brings certainty of its authority and understanding of its power for good in the present. History is a drag to the memory only of that one deaf to its enlightening lessons. That's why Jesus said, "Let him having ears hear." Now, before herbicide, that's a fancy word for weed killer, before weed killer became available, farmers spent untold hours cultivating weeds from cornfields. And cultivating rows of tiny, tender corn plants was tedious at best, slow-moving, monotonous, dusty. It demanded that the farmer pay close and unflagging attention, lest he allow a cultivator's shovel to swing a hair too close to the row and push dirt over the tender plants, covering them or even plowing them out. But to suggest that farmers cultivated corn plants only for the sake of cultivation is silly. Crops are worthy of cultivation because by this work the farmer reaps the good harvest, and it goes to his benefit. In like sense, the history upon which rests our faith and our future, that is, the recorded facts of what happened, specifically in this instance of our common law tradition and the expression of our common law's application in the Declaration of 76, is worthy of consideration for the good that it can yield. We should cultivate our understanding, that is, get the weeds out of our brains that are misinformation. Now, our common law is the nexus that connects biblical truth and its principles to our life today in law and government. Where a person knows the facts of history and he obeys the conclusions that those facts will force, that person can live in expectation of better things in the future, and it will keep his eyes focused in that direction, knowing that better things are yet to come. In truth, by paying attention to the lessons, the facts of the past, which we call history, whether it be an hour ago, a week ago, a year ago, a day ago, a decade ago, a century ago. To pay attention to such facts is to secure the future, and that's what our Declaration of 76 has done. And where the lessons of facts prevail in the lives of men, material blessings will follow. Lord Dalberg Emmerich Acton said it this way: "The lessons of law and government are, quote, deposited by the streams of history, like the grains of gold in the sand of the river, and the knowledge of the past, the record of truths revealed by experience, is eminently practical, as an instrument of action and power that goes to making the future." So cultivation of history's facts should be done in hope of good harvest. To learn the lessons and obey them gained from history is to understand the elements in confidence of at least 4 benefits. First, only by delving into the experiences of others, such as those that signed our Declaration of 76, can one find the footings of God's standards, which are its purposes, its reasons for being, and the base upon which God's standards stand. When we read our Declaration of 76, we can see exactly what the problem was, because it tells us point blank and lists all the abuses and usurpations of the man that called himself emperor of his empire and king of his realm. And we distinguished those two things and said the American colonies were not part of the Kingdom of England. Kingdom is an old Anglo-Saxon word. By its very etymology, it speaks of that government which is limited, and a king is a man whom is limited. Even if we go to a document like Magna Carta, if we want to know what wrongs King John was doing during his kingship, what usurpations he was practicing, and abuses, one need only read what Magna Carta forbids. Magna Carta doesn't come out and say the king has done this, this, and this. Well, our Declaration makes it that clear. But Magna Carta does make it clear by saying the king cannot do this, this, and this. Well, that means that is what he had been doing, and it was time to stop it. Second, a grounding in history of our Declaration of 76 will boost one's ability to foresee the growing application of God's standard. Third, familiarity with past instances of those who have forfeited the safeguards and freedoms of the laws of nature unwritten and of nature's God written enables one to recognize and counter present danger. Put simply, learning history enhances one's sensitivity to violations of due process, which is the foremost of God's principles, sharpening one's ability to distinguish fair play from false and hard blows from that which is foul. Just as flowers without fruit are empty, study without utility is futility. And to study history without present use and application of what one learns is a waste of one's time. The men that first wrote and published Encyclopedia Britannica, by the way, in the year 1771, says there it's published in the flyleaf of the first of 3 volumes by a society of gentlemen in Scotland. But these words appear, and they're applicable here. It says this in that first edition of Encyclopedia Britannica: utility ought to be the principal intention of every publication. Wherever this intention does not plainly appear, neither the books nor their authors have the smallest claim to the approbation of mankind. To read the Declaration of Independence as a scholastic academic exercise is not only a waste of time, it's downright stupid. And when I say stupid, I use that in the literal sense of the word. It is to be thick and slow to not recognize that one can bring application out of that document that is presently usable. And, by the way, if that document does not have an application that is presently usable, that document is worthless. Well, I'm not willing to say it's worthless. I believe it has plenty of present application. Well, we come to a third reason to study the history of our Declaration of 76, and that is this: familiarity with past instances of those who forfeited the safeguards and freedoms of the laws of nature unwritten and of nature's God written enables one to recognize and counter present danger. And learning history enhances one's sensitivity to violations of due process. Fourth, and finally, knowing history's facts boosts one's ability to act wisely within God's first principles, enabling the refinement of our common law by ever more acute application of those principles. A man called Bede, that is B-E-D-E, is also called the father of English history. He wrote in the 7th century A.D., so the history he had of the Isle of Britain went back a good long ways, and he's the first one to really compile a widely read history of England. But he offers this justification for the study of history, and I'm going to quote. He says this: "For if history records good things of good men, the thoughtful hearer is encouraged to imitate what is good. Or if it records evil of wicked men, the good, religious listener or reader is encouraged to avoid all that which is sinful and perverse, and follow what he knows to be good and pleasing to God." Now, we ended in our last session, session number 13, with paragraph 2 of our declaration, and I concluded with this: Europe's bankers, exploiting the fears following England's 17th century internal war, had set up their central bank in England at London. King George was one of its chief beneficiaries. Consequently, he persuaded the then split Parliament, albeit according to his German, not his English sensibilities competing for his loyalty, to help him regain the control of the colonies that his father, George II, and his grandfather, George I, had forfeited by inattention. Both of those those men, his father and his grandfather, had been born in Germany. They were wholly German. King George, though he was German, was born in England, but he was still a prince of a large territory in Germany. And by the way, that is how he brought so many Hessian troops, that's German troops, to America to help slaughter the colonists. And by some reports, some of them are pretty smart, and up to 1/3, these are the things I've read, that sounds like a lot, but 1/3 of the Hessians defected to the American colonies when they got here to the States, because they were indeed slaves, conscripted to kill. And they didn't like that, as most men wouldn't. But paragraph of our Declaration of 76, paragraph 3 of our Declaration of 76 says this: He, that is King George III, has refused to assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. Bottom line, King George III wanted the American colonies to have no local laws because he knew if they did, he would lose control of them. So he suspended their power to have local law. Unlike common law government, civil law government is imperial, from a central command using bureaucrats to enforce that central command's will. Well, King George III was that central command. He claimed to be emperor, that is, commander of the colonies. Not king, emperor. Therefore, his will was imperial, and an emperor's will is law. And he doesn't want any law or standards to be expressed at the local level. Thus, civil law spurns representative bodies that truly represent people. Now, not all legislative bodies represent people. For example, here in the United States, especially at the federal level, it would be a stretch to say that senators and congressmen represent anybody but themselves and those who pay them a lot of money, whether it be those from other countries or corporations controlled by people from other countries, doing business in the United States. Without question, even our congressmen now can't be said in fact to represent anyone. Our founders on that subject said this: if representation of a representative exceeds 1 to 30,000 people, that is, one representative to 30,000, representation becomes meaningless. Well, I believe what they said to be true. Our congressmen now represent, each one of them, throughout the United States, over 600,000, well over 600,000 apiece. I ran for Congress in 1998. At that time, it was over 500,000, but of course the population of the country is growing, and so the representation that's divided up amongst congressmen is growing also. But who can really have anything to say to a congressman that would influence him one way or another? There are too many people. He represents no one. He goes to Congress and works for whoever pays the most money to keep him there. I do not exaggerate. Even if a congressman only had 30,000 people or less to represent, that would be a danger that would be realized in at least half of the instances, if not more. It's called bribery, and it is a crime, although there are many ways to make it appear it doesn't happen. This is Brent, Allan Winters, commonlawyer.com, and this is part 14 of a series discussing the applicability of our Declaration of 76. And next time, we'll dive into paragraph 4 of our Declaration. And I leave you with this: to represent everybody is to represent nobody. And a representative that belongs to everybody belongs to nobody. And a representative that represents too much represents very little. In fact, our law says that a lawyer in our common law tradition can only represent one person or one party at a time. And it is since